This episode of Brains on Games, I finally get to talk about Gloomhaven, Jaws of the Lion. Welcome to Brains on Games. I'm Dr. Brian McDonald, and this episode we're finally going to get to talk about Gloomhaven, Jaws of the Lion. This is a game that was sent to me a little while ago by the folks over at Cephalofair Games, and it's a bit of an older game, but this was my first time getting a chance to try it out. This is a fantasy campaign style game in the vein of Dungeons and Dragons or Diablo, if you want to think of adventure role-playing games on the computer. And it is a game for between 1 and 4 players. There are solo rules for this game. It's for players age 14 and up. It does get a little bit complicated as the scenarios amp up. And it's a game that, well, some scenarios you can play in half an hour, but others might take up to 2 hours to play. Let's take a deeper look at Gloomhaven, Jaws of the Lion. Jaws of the Lion is medium in terms of its complexity, but like I said, it does slowly amp up in terms of introducing rules and mechanics as you play. So if you're a person who's intimidated maybe by complex strategy games, or you don't want to read a great big long rule book, this one gradually eases you in. You don't read a whole bunch of rules before you play the first scenario. There's only a few pages to look at, and then slowly each scenario adds a little bit more and a little bit more as you go. It is a campaign-based game, so your characters are going to change as you play and advance. It's a role-playing game. This is my character, the Hatchet, and slowly the options that your characters have, the abilities that they have, are going to become more advanced as they play, but they're also going to be fighting against more complex creatures and more difficult creatures. It's clever in terms of how they set things up. So I'm showing you just the first scenario. I'm going to try not to spoil very much about this game. It is one of those great big boxes that has boxes inside of it that you're not supposed to open, and decks of cards that you're not supposed to open until you get to a certain point in the game. It's got a little bit of flavor text to introduce you to the story. So there is a story that carries over. There's a mystery that you're trying to solve. You're playing as a group of sort of Dungeons and Dragons style fantasy adventurers who are getting pulled into a mystery as they return back to their hometown. Everything about this game, I think, is clever in terms of how they set things up. You've got the flavor text, you've got the scenario goal, you've got some tips along the way of how you're supposed to set things up and the special rules about the map. You've got the rewards that you're going to earn if you defeat the scenario, and then there's some concluding text that you'll read once you get through it. Now, we didn't actually read all of that text, so there's a little bit of reading here, but what we did instead, there's a little coupon inside of the box that showed an app that we could download, and I purchased a soundtrack, so it has actors and sound effects, and there's music, so it's really atmospheric. When you add the sound and the actors and the effects, you can hear the little monsters in the background as they're dramatically reading this flavor text. You have, of course, a whole pile of tokens. A complicated game like this is going to have some tokens in it, and the tokens come with a pretty good organizer to keep them separated. I will say that the cover for this organizer doesn't stay clamped on there very well, so they do kind of move around because I do store my boxes vertically, so some things kind of jiggled around a little bit as I put it away on the shelf. So there's a bunch of different tokens. The scenario book is pretty good at explaining what each one of those does. All of the monster standees have little numbers on them to make it easy to identify them when you're trying to figure out who you're attacking and what's going to happen if you're successful. Most of them will have white standees, and some have gold standees. And these gold ones are the elite creatures. So this one's number 5, and number 5 in this case is the elite one. On the board, you may be able to see that there are little icons to show where the creatures go and whether they should be placed and whether they should be elite or not, depending on the number of players. So you're going to have more powerful monsters, more numerous monsters when you've got more players who are battling against them. And like I said, this is elegant and clever in the way they set it up. How do you keep track of these stats of all of these 5 different monsters? I did just pull an envelope at random out of the box, and this one has space for 10 different monsters, even though there aren't 10 on the board. And you've got a card. Each of the creatures has a card with statistics on it, and that's going to go into the envelope, if I can put it in here that way. And now you've got stats for the elite monsters and stats for the regular ones, and you've got a spot for damage. If I damage number 5, I'm going to put a little damage counter on number 5. And once they reach whatever their health is, that creature is going to be removed from the board. Combat in this game is very clever as well. All of the players are going to have a very small deck of cards at the beginning of the game. As they advance through scenarios, some of their cards might get upgraded. They might get to add some cards to their deck to give them some additional options. When they're choosing their actions at the beginning, they're going to choose 2 of these cards. They're going to be able to take one action from the top. You can see they're divided in half. They can take one action from the top of one card and one action from the bottom of the other. You can't take 2 top actions. You can't take 2 bottom actions. It's one from the top, one from the bottom. Doesn't matter which one you pick, and you can decide once it's your turn. You don't have to decide even before you see what the other players are going to do. The other thing that's really important about these cards is that they do have numbers in the middle, and the numbers in the middle determine what order the characters are going to take their turns in. So I could play these cards. They go face down like this, and whichever one I flip up is going to be the number, my initiative number, and lower numbers mean that you're going to go faster. The monsters have an initiative number as well, and the players and the creatures all have these little initiative cards with their names on them. So you line these things up, and if I play a 64 and the Vermling Raiders, it probably says somewhere on the scenario book, I know the Vermling Raiders in the first mission all have an initiative of 50. So if I play the 64, the Raiders are going to go first and I'm going to go second. But if I put them in this order instead, then I'll get to go first, and then the Raiders go. Now, you might want to act second in order for the creatures to move closer to you so that they'll be in range of one of your actions. The hatchet is one that has some ranged attacks. He throws throwing axes at the monsters. And so you're just going to be putting these nameplates in order of which player or monster is going to go first. The players all have their individual initiative. The monsters, each kind of creature, will act together, and then you're just moving around and you're taking your actions. So I might be able to heal my character if he's been damaged. I might be able to attack one of those monsters. I can move 5 spaces if I play this one and use the bottom action, and it's very straightforward and clear what the monsters are doing and what the characters are doing. If there's anything that's not clear, there's a little glossary. You can look up a particular term. I think we needed to use it twice, and one was to remind us of how traps work, and another was to remind us, well, if a card says characters, does that include just the players, or does characters include the term characters mean monsters as well? Now, what skills are you working on when you play a game like Jaws of the Lion? Well, I mean, you're budgeting cards and actions, and you're trying to efficiently move through the board. As you discard your cards, when you reclaim them, you're going to lose one of them. So you only have a certain number of actions that you can take before you're going to be knocked out and out of the game. Like I said earlier, as your deck increases in size, then you get more of those options and your player can stay on the board for longer, which makes a lot of sense. So you're trying to work through this and complete the mission as efficiently as possible. And when you're budgeting actions and budgeting cards and doing that hand management, those are all examples of executive functioning skills. Those skills and behaviors you need to work towards a goal. All of these strategy games, the more advanced strategy games that aren't entirely based on luck, do tend to involve those executive functioning skills. Here you also have, because you're working on a map with these hexes and there are obstacles and you have to calculate distances to these creatures, there's a spatial element to it as well. You're predicting, okay, well, I know how these creatures move, so where are they going to be on the next turn? How can I get my character in range to do whatever it is that I want to do? Maybe there's some treasure on the board that I want to run towards, or a trap that I want to avoid. So there are lots of spatial problem-solving aspects to Jaws of the Lion as well. So you've got the visual spatial skills, you've got the executive functioning skills, and the players are working together too. Now, sometimes you might get a player who's a little greedy and he tries to collect the loot before everybody else can get it, maybe. But for the most part, you really are cooperating in this game. So the players might look at this layout and maybe chat a little bit or plan a little bit about how they're going to tackle things. You do want all of your characters to all the players in the game to have sort of equal abilities so that they'll all be useful and be able to get you through. Each one is completely different. These guys are asymmetric. So my hatchet can throw his axes and the red guard can pull monsters towards him, but he does tend to be more of a face-to-face kind of a fighter. So you really are working together and planning together how you're going to do things. And part of that is sort of understanding what the unique abilities are of each of these characters as you go through the game. At first, we didn't really know what all the cards did and what we could do. And we gradually got to know one another's characters as we played. And then you name your character as you advance. Anyway, there's so many neat little things about this. But in terms of the skills, we are talking about executive functioning, spatial reasoning, or visual spatial skills, and that cooperation where everybody's planning so that everyone can win the game. Final thoughts about Gloomhaven, Jaws of the Lion. Well, this is top tier, in my opinion, in terms of the production. The artwork is great. The creatures are great. The components, the miniatures, the way things are organized. It's so elegant with the numbered monsters and the elite versus the normal common monsters, and the envelopes that allow you to keep track of which ones are being damaged and which ones have been removed from the board, and the way that the treasure works and the characters gradually increase. The fact that the rules are added gradually. I mean, this is a great big book, but there's 25 scenarios in here, and you're only slowly adding more and more and more as you go. It's a game that really does evoke the Dungeons and Dragons style combat, where you've got these characters that are gradually improving and becoming more powerful with more actions and options that they can take, and they have names and you sort of become attached to them across the scenarios. Of course, there's not a lot of actual role playing where you're acting out the story. It is more like an action RPG, maybe like Diablo. But I mean, the reason why I started getting into these games was to give my kids, to have an excuse to pull the kids away from video games. And when you've got a game like this that is evocative of those kinds of video games that the kids like to play, where you're buying equipment, your character is improving, and you're fighting monsters, and it's tense when you get towards the end and you're not sure if all the characters are going to make it through. This is exactly what you want. It's a lateral transition, I think, from the video games to this kind of a tabletop action role-playing game. And there's the story, and I mean, with the bonus content of the voiceovers and things like that, it really does suck you in to Gloomhaven. And like I said, I love that it eases you in as well, because there's not such a steep learning curve for the new players. Now, are there downsides? Well, I mean, I think I mentioned that the token container has a cover, but the cover doesn't lock on there very well. So sometimes the tokens maybe get jiggled around inside the box. That's certainly not the end of the world. That was the worst thing about it. Maybe the other thing is that it is a campaign game, and campaign style games are meant to be played by the same players over and over again, because you're building these same characters through. Now, if there is a gap of several weeks or a month in between games, well, now that gradual, gentle learning curve becomes steep again, because you're going to forget some of those rules that you knew from scenario 1 that were maybe second nature by scenario 2, but a month later, maybe they're not second nature anymore. So you might have to go back and reread some of the scenario rules to make sure you understand how doors work, or obstacles work, or difficult terrain, or traps, or whatever it might be. So you're meant to play with the same players. You do kind of want to have the games close enough together that you don't forget the rules and you don't forget about your characters and all their abilities, of course. But let me tell you, despite those minor quibbles about the game, I played this with my 19-year-old son and his 19-year-old friend. So there were 3 of us playing. And I always think it's awesome when I get to be involved in my kids' activities with their friends. I love that. And I get to know their friends, which is awesome too. We played this together. We played several scenarios, and they both said, we want to schedule this every weekend. These are two guys who are in university, who have their own schedules and their own weekend plans. I mean, you know what teenagers are like on weekends. They want to go out with their friends and do all kinds of things. But we played this, and both of the boys said, let's schedule this. Let's put it in. Now, we didn't get to play this weekend. Why? Because they have exams and midterms. So it didn't quite work out every single weekend. But this was the intention. We played it, and they're like, okay, there's 25 missions that we can do. Well, how long is it going to take us to play that? When can we get the next version of Gloomhaven? What's this Frosthaven thing? So I mean, that's the best review I can think of. Two 19-year-olds saying, let's do this again. Let's put this in our calendar so that we can continue. We want to play this game. And I got to be involved in that activity with the boys. So I can't thank Cephalofair Games enough for sending Jaws of the Lion my way. I am sort of thinking ahead to what could possibly be more advanced in the original Gloomhaven, you know, the big box. What's going to be different? But we are really enjoying playing through the scenarios here. We haven't played through everything yet. There's still some boxes that are still closed. I can't wait to get back to it, but exams are kind of getting in the way. So it's good that the boys have priorities and they're prioritizing their schoolwork over playing games. But wow, this was a very fun experience, and we're looking forward to playing more. The Gloomhaven games are not inexpensive. They are great big boxes that are full of content. I do sort of think of them as like a trip to the movies. So if the three, my son and his friend and I all went to a movie together, well, we'd be paying for movie tickets and snacks, and that would be a couple of hours, and we would have fun for that couple of hours, which is sort of what we did here. But we still have 20 more scenarios left to play. So, I mean, I can't say enough good things about Gloomhaven, and I'm probably going to make sure that our next scenario is in the calendar so that the boys can come over and we can play it again. So thanks again to Cephalofair Games for sending this game my way. If you have any questions about Gloomhaven, Jaws of the Lion, or anything, or any suggestions about the show, you can, of course, leave them in the comment section of the video, or you can email me at brian@brainsongames.ca. brainsongames.ca is the website. That's where future episodes will go. The previous ones are already up there. Brains on Games is the Twitter handle and the Facebook page and the Instagram feed, so we're all over the place. And if you enjoyed this video and you want to be notified of future ones, you can head on over to YouTube and click that subscribe button. Thanks for joining me. Hopefully I'll see you next time.